very much for having me here. I've always wanted to attempt Communicate, never managed it. And I still can't attempt Communicate, so I've got to leave this afternoon to get back to the university, which is really, really depressing, but it's great to be in this session and to have heard the other parts. I especially enjoyed the harvest story. And I like the tip that we can sometimes skip right to the climax. Now, I'm a social scientist, so you can imagine what the punchline will be. More research is needed, so I thought I would get that out of the way to start with. What I'm going to describe is some tentative, very tentative answers to the question, even if we have fantastically compelling stories about reconnection to the natural world, about more environmentally conscious living, what are the conditions under which people are most likely to be attentive to those stories and to be able to act on them? So it's a story about our receptiveness to stories, if you like. It fits into a big program that's been funded by DEFRA, ESRC and the Scottish Government, SLRG, the Sustainable Lifestyles Research Group, one of many big programs that are going on in the universities and think tanks at the moment about the concept of behaviour change. How do we encourage, enable, facilitate, inspire meaningful change for more sustainable living? And as part of that, how do we inspire a greater sense of connection with the natural world? So I'll talk very briefly about that program. But there's an invitation, if anybody would like an overview about that whole research program, I'm absolutely happy to come and deliver that to your organisation or to send you an overview presentation, so do ask. I'll then offer a few stories about change, and I'll focus in particular on stories that emerge from a piece of work that we're doing about the theory that people are most receptive to these stories when they're going through significant transitions in their lives. So SLRG, I won't go through all of that. That's the kind of thing you would expect a big program like this to do. We're trying to contribute to a robust evidence base and a conceptual framework to think about what are the barriers to sustainable living, what are the factors that will enable it, and what are the policy implications that might arise from that. We've got a range of projects under the headings of community, economy, moments of change, the processes of change, and synthesis. I'm going to focus on these ones, processes of change, where we've got a collaboration going with the University of Bath, where we've been looking at people who have been moving house or not. And then a piece of work that we've been doing with the University of Surrey, which looks at two groups, people going into retirement, so yes, the over 65s have got a part, and people who are experiencing the arrival of the first child in their household. But before we get to that, let's do some unliberating stories. The overall theme here is the intimidating idea of liberating stories. I'm not sure how liberating my final stories are. I think they're semi-liberating. But let's look at some unliberating ones first, then we'll feel better when we get to the research-based ones. They're to do with the Mexican standoff, the power of social context. It's not easy being green, and individualism is not enough. So what can I mean by that? What's the Mexican standoff? Well, that's between government, business, and the citizen, three big sources of agency and action in social change. And in relation to sustainable living, environmental action, I think that the deep structural problem we've got is that each of those thinks that it's up to the other two to make the first moves in doing anything meaningful about the environment. And I can back that up with research findings, but I think as a general headline, it's correct. Government is very reluctant to regulate in this area. Business is desperate not to go too far in case it gets out of step with its competitors and in case it gets ahead of consumers. And citizens quite rightly think that they don't on their own have the agency to do what's needed, so the responsibility should fall on government and business. However, the citizen has been a huge focus for action by government and businesses. Governments such as ours with the Behavioural Insights team in the Cabinet Office, all sorts of work that's been commissioned by DEFRA and others. Businesses such as Unilever, who are interested in behaviour change, are putting a huge amount of effort into understanding and developing the techniques to influence the citizen, whether the citizen thinks they're a valid agent for change in this domain or not. So we've got a Mexican standoff going on, so that's one big constraint that we can see in this domain, but there are more constraints. which need to be mentioned. They will operate at the level of the individual. We don't choose to be actors in isolation in relation to anything that we decide to get engaged with, whether it's the natural world, whether it's changing our lifestyles, whether it's some form of political engagement. We're always subject to the power of context, to the social norms that are around us, the people we want to imitate, the people we take our cues from, the values that are in the air, the infrastructure that we have to contend with, which might box us in physically in many ways, as well as mentally. All of that means it's not easy being green. We've done lots of research with groups of people who self-identify as pro-environmental citizens, sustainable livers. And they unanimously say we are committed to living in a green way, but it's really hard to do. And often we fall short. We constantly feel as though we're going against the grain. There isn't much support coming for us. Now, if you take all that together, along with the Mexican standoff, we can see that individualism is not enough, but it's often the focus that we have in policy making and in business. Focus on topping up individuals with enough information, enough education, enough inspiring stories, and then they'll act. But individualism in that way is not enough. All of that taken together gives us something that's already been mentioned, which is the value-action gap. That we can have all the right values, attitudes, we can have the right information, but we'll still be constrained by our social setting, by the infrastructure that's available to us, all sorts of other constraints put a gap between what we want to do and what we can actually manage to do. So those are the unliberating stories, and a potentially liberating one comes from two of the projects which I've just mentioned within the SRG programme. And we have got the theory that maybe in moments of decisive change in people's lives, we can see opportunities to start closing that gap between values and action. We're in fact not even to worry about the values, simply to see if there are opportunities for people to act in different ways, which might then in turn generate a change in values. So we're looking at people who are moving house, the arrival of the first child, and retirement. The theory is that there are habits that form in our lives which are very difficult to shift. And in moments of rupture, which might be to do with leaving home, getting married, having a new baby, retiring and so on, those habits stand a chance of being disrupted in positive ways. People get exposed to new places, new networks. Could it be that in those moments of change, we see the possibility to intervene and make a difference? Well, the story is interesting. We had a very large survey of house movers in Peterborough. We're testing the receptiveness of people who move house to a package of information and ideas and incentives for green living. And it looks as though, this is still very tentative, it's still in progress, it looks as though there is a real effect, that people are more receptive to those green incentives and messages at that time. Similarly, when we look at 80 households in real depth, incredible richness of detail about their lifestyles, deep qualitative study, lots of interviews, diaries and questionnaires, it looks as though people who are going through those sorts of changes are receptive to messages about their connection with the natural world, thinking about the long term, especially when the first child arrives. And people become more receptive both to deliberate efforts to change their lifestyles in a greener direction, but also to what we call inadvertent environmentalism. They're often doing green things without being able to frame it in that way. So there's real encouragement in those stories, we think. It looks as though the evidence is showing us, though there is a lot more research to be done, that these moments of change offer opportunities, moments at which the right stories can be told. But, bearing in mind everything I've said about the need for social context to be taken into account, that there are limits to individualism, we can't simply rely on focusing on households one at a time, families one at a time. We need trusted intermediaries. And one thing that has emerged from this research is that at those moments of change, people become more receptive when the messages are delivered by trusted networks such as Mumsnet, such as local church groups, school groups, intermediary bodies, which can amplify what those people are going through. So you might decide you're going to take new steps, change your habits at these moments of change, but it helps to do it in other groups that you trust. You have safety in numbers, and when you have strength in numbers. And we conclude from that these moments of change are potentially a fantastic opportunity for storytelling and encouraging change, but they do need backup in the form of lifestyle support systems, trusted intermediary groups who can identify these moments, weave people together so that they're not simply acting on their own. And then these opportunities can be reinforced. As I say, far more work is needed. This is work in progress. We will be finishing all these pieces of work over the next 2 or 3 months. And if you would like presentations either on those projects or on the bigger programme, very happy to do it. Thanks very much.